Speaking about like getting the
Morning protein shakes.
There we go.
All right, let's do this.
Okay, this is Recording Rural. I'm Riley.
I'm Nathan.
I'm Ginger Jen.
Yeah, there you go.
I guess I should introduce myself to these guys. Hi, I'm Ginger Jen. For anybody who doesn't know me, you've clearly been living under a rock. I've lived in Smithers for the last 10 years. I am a RCMP officer with the Smithers RCMP, and I also just live here. I'm a real human. I'm not a robot. Well, at least most of me is not a robot. So
That's true.
That's true. Yeah, we'll take that.
like three quarters.
3/4.
We'll get into the robot.
Yeah.
We don't want to hop into that too quick.
No,
Right.
we're excited because this is our first guest. Thank you for coming on.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
I love that you have no idea what you're doing because I also have no idea what I'm doing. So
Yeah.
We'll go for it.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Exactly. I won't probably blunder our way through it. So.
Yeah.
All right.
When did you become an RCMP officer?
So they were doing a massive hiring push in 2007, 2008 in order to get enough members for the Olympic Games in Vancouver in 2010. I'm fairly certain that the standards were much lower at the time because they just really needed people, and that's probably the only reason I got in. And I'm so grateful that I did because when I applied, it took 7 months to go through the application process, and then I went away to Depot in the end of 2008. I graduated Depot in March of 2009, and I've been a member ever since. So this coming March will be 15 years for me. I have done all of my service in Northern BC in rural communities because I love the North, number one. I grew up on Vancouver Island, and one of the things that I couldn't stand about the island was the rain.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
I don't want to. I'll just tell you I hate the rain.
The mystery of the rain.
I definitely, I needed to be somewhere where there was cold. I needed to be somewhere where there was snow. Anywhere that I could be outside and active and not wet, like all the time. That's what I wanted. I think that's my phone that's vibrating. We're just going to put that down there. Anyways.
And you needed space for your dogs.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Also, if people can continue to call my dogs fur babies, can I start calling their kids skin puppies?
I would allow it. I think that would be reasonable.
Sounds like equality.
I think that
Fairly
sounds
reasonable.
better than baby,
Right?
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We might need to cut that part
Skin puppies is good.
out. Ooh. So,
Did you end up actually working at the Olympic Games then?
no, I didn't.
You weren't.
My husband did, but I didn't. I ended up opting to stay in Fort Nelson. So the thing about me is I grew up in a small town. I grew up in Shawnigan Lake. There was a little collection of small towns. There was Shawnigan, Cobble Hill, Mill Bay, Lake Cowichan, like all of these small areas around in between Victoria and Duncan. And that's where now North Cowichan. That's where I spent the majority of my time was in small towns. I loved the idea of being a rural police officer, a small town police officer, because in my mind, that gave me the opportunity to not just be a nameless, faceless person with a badge. I wanted people to be able to recognize me and see that I am a real life human. Even outside of the uniform, I do things in the community. I interact with people. I make sure that this community understands that I police where I live because I love where I live and I love to police. So when I am in small communities, I'm able to connect with people in a totally different way. To talk about an example that you brought up before and that Riley experienced himself.
As a young partner.
As a
young lad.
As a wee lad in the community, I try to build connections with people so that they understand that police are human, right? We're not nameless, faceless robots. Plus, I think it's so important to build rapport with the community and the people that I'm going to be interacting with so that when I show up, it's not a shock, right? I think that too often there is a fear or a resistance or a hesitation when it comes to the police that causes people to be a lot more closed off
Mhm.
when the police are dealing with them. And that, it honestly makes my job so much harder if people don't want to have anything to do with the police. And I understand that people have had all kinds of experiences, right? I'm sure that they have dealt with an asshole or two because I know they're out there. I've worked with them. I've been a member for 15 years. I can name a few, but I won't. Might need to cut that part out too. And but regardless, I wanted people to be interacting with me in a positive way as much as possible, so that if I ever had to deal with them in a way that was less positive or actually negative or in an enforcement capacity, they would understand that this is the way that I am.
Mhm.
I try and be very genuine when I'm dealing with everybody all the time. So what you see is what you get. I am spazzy and awkward and often say things that are probably inappropriate, but that's me,
Mhm.
right? So if I show up in an enforcement capacity or show up to tell you some bad or sad news, I want you to be able to interact with me as though I am a human and I'm not just this uniform.
Fair.
Does that make sense?
Totally.
So one of the ways that we talked about earlier that I tried to build that rapport and build that connection, I really pride myself on doing a lot of work building connection with the younger generations. I do work with the Smithers Secondary School. I do work with a lot of the teenagers. And it's because I don't want them to be afraid of the police. I want them to be okay interacting with the police. And I want them to understand that I'm not here in a break your spirit capacity. I'm here in a trying to keep you safe capacity.
Mhm.
I also, my personal opinion, and not the opinion of the RCMP, is that there is only a certain number of years of interaction with police that can actually make a difference. Right? By the time you get to like 25 and above, people are pretty set in their ways and they're not necessarily willing to make changes. They're like, I've been doing this since I was a kid. I'm going to keep doing it this way. And sometimes you get the old crusty dudes who are like, I've never worn a seatbelt. I'm not going to start now.
Yeah.
I'm not going to make a difference, right? I'm not going to positively impact somebody's life or experience at that stage in their life.
Right.
As much. I'd say the percentage of that significantly decreases the older the person gets. That being said, that's why I like to do a lot of work with the younger generations. I like to make sure that they have positive interactions with the police so that when a negative interaction has to happen, they understand that it's not the end of the world. This is not the only time you ever talk to me. We can work through this just like we've talked previously in the past.
Mhm.
So one of the ways that I like to build rapport is a lot of the time I will find out where the parties are. You can probably remember this, but there was more than one party where I would just show up with like a pit party out in Telqua or a grad party where I would show up with a bucket of homemade cookies, a bag of marshmallows to roast on the fire, and an armload of barf buckets because hey, it's teenagers just partying, and I'm not there to criticize kids for blowing off steam, to pick on the people who have chosen to dabble in drinking or trying drugs. I'm there in a safety capacity.
Mhm.
I'm there to remind the kids that we can all get along. Nobody wants to get hurt. And I'm there as a reminder that even when you think somebody isn't, we are watching you.
Mhm.
I like to joke that cops are like the raptors in Jurassic Park, where you see one and you're like, clever girl, and then there's others that come out of the woodwork. So usually I would show up at these parties and be like, hey guys, what's up? And I'd talk and laugh and share these cookies. We'd have an interaction. I would roast some marshmallows, build some s'mores, and then I would surreptitiously find who's drinking tonight, who's the DD, and I'd go over and I'd be like, okay, you're spending the night here. Do you have a safety plan? Do you have a backup? Do you have a cell phone? I just make sure that go over safety things with these kids, and then I'd chat with the DDs and be like, hey, I know you're a DD. That's amazing. I'm so proud of you. But just remember, you have your end. You can't be over passenger, and you can't have any liquor in your system. And I'd be like, oh, okay, Ginger Dan, thanks so much. I'd be like, just remember, I'm watching you. And then I would fade out, right? So I would disappear into the woodwork. I'd usually find somewhere down the road or a ways away to park. And then as people start leaving the party, I check them.
Yeah.
Right? Hey, I just chatted with you. You're not over passenger. I'm super proud. That's amazing. Congratulations. Have a great night.
Yeah.
Or, parents would be driving by and they'd stop and say, is everything okay? The police are here. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm just making sure your kids are safe. And they'd be like, oh, thank you so much. So-and-so said she had a drink and she was supposed to be the DD, but now she called for me to pick up her and her friends. I'm like, oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nice.
So it's worked out really, really well for me to have that kind of approach. And I truly believe that the people who work in large urban centers, I'm sure that a lot of them want to be able to do some of these interactions. They just don't have the time. Don't have the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, some people don't have the inclination. They don't care. And that's fair. There are, just like any large corporation, there are people who are really into certain things and people who are not.
Mm-hmm.
I like interacting with kids. I want to be able to make these positive interactions count. And obviously some of them have, because now I've got kids who are going through police camp and contacting me and being like, hey, Ginger Jen, remember that time you did the blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, yeah, I totally do. They're like, can you write me a reference? I'm like, sure, I can do that. No problem.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it also stems back from, if I'm talking too much, just let me know.
There you go.
I
No, you're
kind
good.
of,
Keep going.
like I said, I just kind of go on a...
Keep going on.
This
Okay.
This is easy for us. Then.
So, this also stems back from when I was a teenager. And I have told this story so many times. So listeners, feel free to fast forward if you've heard it. But I grew up in a rural town. I started hanging out with a bad group of people. A group of people who were doing some illegalish things. We stole a couple road signs. We lit a campfire when there was a campfire ban. I'm not talking about like the worst possible crime, but I'm talking about dabbling.
Yeah.
And I had a police officer come to my house and he's like, look, you are clearly a good kid who was raised well, who came from a good family and has good support. He's like, I think it's just your impulsivity that has gotten you to behave like you have been. And he's like, if you keep hanging out with this group of people, they're going to feed off of that. And you're going to go down a path where we're going to interact with each other all the time. And it's not going to be in a good way.
Mm.
Or I can give you the second chance to take a different path. Maybe start hanging out with some different people who are more positive influence on you. And, we can still keep in touch. And who knows? Maybe you might want to do law enforcement one day. Well, to say that was significantly impactful is an understatement, because I definitely chose a different path. And that member's name was Sabri Diab. Constable Sabri Diab. We still keep in touch
Nice.
to this day.
Very cool.
But once a year, I will email him. I'll be like, hey man, I'm coming to the island. Do you want to sit and have a visit? He's like, absolutely, I totally do. So he's retired now. Do you want to check that?
Yeah. I don't think it'll make a difference, but I'll check it
Oh,
anyway.
okay. I mean, I don't care. I was like, yeah, let's turn it off and just do the recording. I clearly have a face for radio. So, every year or so, I'll send him an email. Hey, man, how's it going? All good. I'm coming to the island. Do you want to sit and have a coffee? Yeah, we can meet up. We can meet up here. Amazing. And we'll go and have a coffee and have a visit, and we'll catch up on each other's lives. And it's been a really amazing experience to go through something that I think a lot of kids go through. Not everybody has the police come to their house, but some people do.
Yep.
And some people it doesn't make a difference for, but for a select few, I feel like at that crucial turning point in their lives,
Mm-hmm.
it does make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what I live for.
Yeah.
I always said that if I could impact one person, positively impact one person's life to send them in a different, better, successful, contributing direction, then it's all been worth it.
Yeah.
And I still believe that.
It's cool to see the parallels of, I think, for Nathan and myself, knowing that if you can reach kids on like the physical literacy side young, they're probably going to stay active for life.
Yeah.
And I mean, the reason that, we wanted to have you on was we consider cops and all these other professions healthcare providers.
Yeah.
And if for you're focusing on the younger generation, if you can interact with them then, they're more likely to follow a healthier, more productive, more whatever you want to call it, life moving forward. It's really cool to see those the synchronicity between the two and why we do include cops and teachers and whatnot.
Well, and that's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about this podcast is because not only are you guys focusing on like rural healthcare, but you're taking a more global approach. It's very out of the box thinking. So yay, high five. Gold stars for both of you.
Yeah.
But the idea that it's not just physical activity and physical health. It is, neurokinetics. It is mental health and well-being. It is developmental health and well-being. And that from a policing standpoint, developmental health, well-being. I also, as you know, I'm a certified personal trainer and nutritionist on the side. I do that literally just for funsies to help people in the community. I also am a soon-to-be Paralympic athlete. I play for a Paralympic team for Team Canada, which is kind of a big deal, I guess. I'm definitely the most excited about it ever, but I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. But so I'm definitely somebody who believes in the idea of a multifaceted approach for mental health, physical health, general health and well-being, especially in a way that positively contributes to society.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
There was a couple things where I was thinking, oh man, like the communication skills that you would need to operate in people's emotions would be quite high. Like I was thinking, if you at the beginning when you're talking about how if you have like that rapport with that individual, then it makes everything easier because people don't tend to make very good decisions when they're stressed like crazy.
Yeah.
Or I was thinking about how like for kids, at a party, it's not sexy to be wise. It's not cool to think, but sometimes bad things happen. Yeah. But then all of a sudden something bad happens and everyone's like, oh shit, I guess this is like what all the adults are talking about.
Exactly.
So it's like, it's cool that like a huge component of your job is you have to bring like a rational mind to an irrational situation in a way that's like palpable or a way that's like, that someone can receive really well. Do you feel like, is that like something that you've always naturally been good at? Is that something that you've learned along the way? Is that like changed at all?
It's definitely changed. So I think that I've always been a pretty good communicator. That being said, I haven't always been the best at receiving communication. So things like feedback when I was younger, feedback from teachers, feedback from my parents, I wasn't always very good at receiving that feedback. That is something that I've had to consciously evolve my brain and communication skills over time. It's something that I'm always evolving, and that's actually another reason why I wanted to be a rural police officer. When I got out of depot, when I was still at depot, and they were like, okay, where do you want to go? I was like, put me in a shitty northern town. That's what I want. They're like, really? And I'm like, yeah, if it has forced housing, I'm in. They're like, cool, Fort Nelson. I'm like, yep.
Where?
Okay. Jujel, where am I going? But I was so excited because in a place like that, you have very few resources, right? Very few resources. Everybody looks at police and looks at all of the gear that they're wearing. Yes, I carry a gun. Yes, I carry a CEW or taser. I carry my spray, my baton. I'm I am certified to carry the carbine and have all of these other weapons, but the tools that I use the most, and I always ask kids this when I do like talks, I'm like, what do you guys think that I use the most? Everybody's like, your gun, your taser, your nightstick for beating people. I'm like, no. It is literally my brain and my mouth. Yeah. The ability to think and communicate amongst high stress situations in those very, very stressful situations where other people are not able to receive information. That is when I have the ability to really thrive. And by being put in a northern community without a lot of extra resources, it has forced me to continue to develop that over time.
Totally. Yeah. You can't just call like emergency response team like whenever shit hits the fan.
Yeah. True story.
Yeah.
So when I was in Fort Nelson, if something happened within a mile of like the start of town at the one restaurant to the end of town, which was like the snowmobiling field, if something happened within that area, okay, I've got backup. I've got one person who can probably get to me before I die.
Wild.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that the police officer will get to me before I die, because the ambulance, they were on call. Who the heck knows where they were? It would take a minimum of 40 minutes for them to get anywhere. And I'm not knocking BC Ambulance. I'm just telling the story that at this particular time, that was the reality of my situation.
Right.
Yeah.
So because I spent so much time working alone without resources, I had to be good at talking.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I go into the Fort, which was one of the bars in Fort Nelson, and there's a big honkin' brawl, and I'm just like, okay, cool, one person wading in, yeah, I'm a giant ginger, I'm 6'1", I can smash a dude, but it's not really my way. So I'm not gonna wade in to all of these fists to find out what's happening.
Yeah.
Right? That's dumb. I'm gonna get my ass kicked. I don't want that.
Yeah.
So I had to develop my imagination and my communication and my thinking out of the box skills. So there was one night where we were at the Roadhouse, which was the other bar. There was only 2 bars in Fort Nelson. The Fort was kind of like the Twin here, where, there's a bit of a dance floor and there's some tables, and it's not high quality individuals there all the time. And then there was the Roadhouse, which was basically where all of the riggers went when they came in for the weekend. So to put it into perspective, when I was in Fort Nelson, there was a total of 20 members. 16 of them were general duty that were on the road all the time. And we'd be working 2 at a time, maybe 3 at a time. So when I was up there, it was during the major oil field boom between 2008 and 2013. So the population of Fort Nelson went from like just under 4,500 people to 12,000, but most of them were living in camps. So you've got people with like, on average, a 5th to 8th grade education who have done some sort of ticketed trade now, that have been in the bush for 2 weeks, and they come out of the bush with money in their pocket and cocaine in their nose, and they're looking for one of the F's at the bar, a fight or a... So if you can't find one because it was 25-1 guys to girls, then you were looking for a fight, and that is what happened. So we get to the Roadhouse, and there has to be like 60 riggers all just in this massive swarm that has come out into the parking lot. And I was working with 2 other guys. One of them's like stroking his mustache. He's like, well, this is happening. And the other one's like, okay, let's go. And I grabbed the back of his vest and hauled him back. I was like, dude, no. He's like, what are we going to do? Are we going to spray them all? I was like, that's a lot of paperwork. So I call on the radio. I'm like, hey, fire, can you bring a water truck? Yep, sure, no problem. It's 30 below. Got a whole bunch of riggers in their Carhartts and t-shirts just fighting in the parking lot. The fire truck comes. We spray the entire crowd down with water. Minus 30. That's freaking cold. So guess what? Everybody dispersed. We picked out the bleeders and then found out what happened. Right? It went from 60 people all swarming to 5 bleeders. We treat them. We talk to them. We figure out what's going on.
Nice.
Right? But
Creative.
I did that without a single reason for me to use force.
Yeah.
So there are different ways of doing these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important for not just police officers to realize that there are so many different ways of doing things, but I think it's important for people in the general public who perceive police in different ways to realize that for the most part, I don't want to fight with anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't. I understand when I'm dealing with you, you may be having the worst day of your life. I understand that you have probably had some bad experience with the police at some point in your life, or you know somebody who has. But that doesn't mean that I'm that person.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And if we've never had an interaction before, give me a chance.
Yeah.
Right?
I know we've talked about like most healthcare providers in rural communities you kind of have to be the jack of all trades. Like you can't, like and correct me if I'm wrong, but if someone's living in a larger center in a city, the cop can be more specialized to, I don't know, drugs or low income housing dispute things or whatever might be going on. Where up here, there's kind of, here's the amount of RCMP or here's the amount of cops that are in a city. We all have to deal with all the things that are going to come up, and you kind of have to, I mean, like what we're doing right now, fly by the seat of your pants and
Absolutely.
Start to just like trial things.
Yep.
Have you, when you were talking about having to take, I guess, feedback, grow on how you like actually take feedback in, do you have any good examples of where like maybe earlier on in your career, the way you handled an interaction and the feedback is in how someone was communicating with you and changed when you had that same sort of interaction a little bit later in your career and been like,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, geez, do I have an example? It's like 15 years of files are just like through my brain. Okay, so one thing that I can say is in the very beginning of my career, even in the very beginning of my life, I had a hard time receiving feedback. Anytime somebody was like, oh, Jen, did you know that blah, 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 I took it as a criticism because I either didn't know or I didn't do it right. And I was really hard on myself. But I actually took counseling and help through the force psychologist to start recognizing those things. And it took a significant mindset shift and some hard work to recognize that those are just learning opportunities. Mm-hmm. Maybe it is a criticism, regardless of whether or not it's a criticism or correction or just an opportunity to look at it a different way. All of that is a learning experience. So you've probably heard me say I've adopted the mantra that when you stop learning, you stop living. Mm-hmm. Because I think a lot of people, they get stuck in their ways. The human body and the human brain are designed for routine. They love routine. Sure. But if you never do anything that takes you away from or breaks you out of that routine, our brains lose the ability to work with those changes. Sure. and manage that spontaneity or that chaos that occurs. Mm. And so it definitely took a long time, a couple of years for me to be able to do a complete shift to, okay, it's not a criticism. I'm learning. This is an opportunity to learn. And when I was able to make that mindset shift, oh, wow, did it open up some really interesting opportunities. And even now, like, I want to give you an example because I was like, oh, sorry, contact. This is a small space.
Yeah.
It's getting warm.
We're working on it.
Yeah, that's cool. Maybe a fan.
Yeah.
You're about as red as I am right now. Plus, I'm really excited about talking things that I love. So, fairly recently, I took a statement. It wasn't even my file. So you talk about having to be a ginger of all trades, master of none. Mm-hmm. I work general duty. So when somebody calls the police for help or calls the RCMP station, I'm the one that usually gets dispatched to that situation. It can be anything from child sexual abuse to a neighborhood dispute about who is dumping leaves on whose lawn, right? It can be farmers not maintaining their fence line and, it's this person's responsibility to keep their animal off my property. Well, it's your responsibility to keep the fences so that the animal can't get onto your property. Like, some of it is the dumbest stuff, but some of it is actual crime, like drinking and driving and like violent offenses against other people. Mm-hmm. So I literally have to have a giant toolbox of skills that I can bring in any given situation. So fairly recently, somebody else had a file, and I love interviews. I love interviews. I don't care if I'm talking to I don't care if I'm talking to a witness and getting as much information about what they saw and what they felt and what they experienced, or if I'm talking to an offender and finding out the why of, we know you did this, but there's always so much more to the why. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So we recently had this file where we were doing an investigation. I came on shift and one of the members was like, "Hey, Ginger Jen, you love to do interviews?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do." He's like, "Do you want to interview this person?" I'm like, "Absolutely." So I went into that room, and that was one of the things that I was able to focus on. It was a horrible crime. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was a really horrible crime. It was, I have a significant moral detest for anybody who commits crimes against children. I had to put my personal feelings aside and put on my, emotional police barrier to be able to walk into that room and not headbutt that person in the face, which is what, let's say, anybody who likes kids would want to do. But I was able to put that aside, take the emotions out of it, and just go in there with a logic and learning mindset. Okay, so these are the facts that we talked about. Now I want to understand where they are coming from. So in the beginning of my career, I might have been like, "Oh, gross, disgusting, that's terrible, you're a horrible person," in my head. But instead, I am able to compartmentalize that, put it aside, so that when I go into that room, I am focused on the job that I am there to do, which is receiving as much information, as much communication as I can from that person. Because as much as there are people in this world that do terrible things, I truly believe that the amount of terrible people in this world is actually fairly small. I think that a lot of people are not inherently bad, but they do end up doing bad things. But there is definitely a level of darkness in this world that I have seen.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That also sounds like it allows you to have like a humility or like a wisdom in your communication where you enter into the situation where you don't make it about yourself. You make it about like justice and justice for the victim, justice for the family or whatever. And I feel like if you went to that situation without that open communication skill, and you just acted off of like the impulse of that moral compass, then the outcome could have been more negative.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Which is cool.
It also, it prevents me from going into any situation with blinders on. So I'm coming into an investigation that somebody else has done. With all due respect to my cohorts, I always hope that they have the right person. But what if they don't, right? If I go in there guns blazing, metaphorical guns blazing, thinking that this person has done this terrible thing, then I'm not going in there with an open mind, right? I'm not going in there with the ability to fly by the seat of my pants and collect as much information as possible. I'm going in there looking for them to answer these questions, right? Sure, I want them to ask these questions, but I want it to happen in a natural way so that I can also understand what is it that has happened in your life that makes what's happening now okay for you. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. It also makes it kind of feels like a very full circle when it comes to your love for interacting with kids. Like if you kind of go, a lot of the reasons why people do bad things started because someone disregarded them. Like they had their demons when they were a kid, and instead of being helped, they were judged or exactly. Yeah. It's cool to kind of go, okay, maybe kind of like what you're talking about with as someone gets older, maybe your capacity to change them might decrease, but you can kind of go, okay, but the theme of people being hurt is that hurt people. Exactly. Then maybe when I'm working with youth, I can sort of break that cycle.
Yeah,
which
definitely.
Is pretty cool. Yeah. That's awesome. I was curious about how rural geography impacts your job compared to being in a city. I don't know. Does that?
No. That's a really good question. So that's kind of a broad, obviously a broad question. Rural community and response time.
Gotcha.
Let's definitely talk about that because it's not just about response time, it's about location. So the majority of the calls that we get are, based in Smithers, based in Morristown, based in Telqua, but what about those rural communities, those communities like Fort Babine, where it takes us an hour and a half to get there? Because even if we are driving an F-350 pickup and we're going as quick as we can, there are still logging trucks, potholes, animals, like all these different things, and you can't negate the distance, right? So all I can say with regards to that is people's expectations about the police's ability to get to them are often skewed by the reality of things like physics and gravity.
Totally.
Right?
Sure. People watch movies and there's just like helicopters and cops driving the streets and blowing through reds, whereas here it's like there's no red light. It's just
a long
super
road.
long dirt road with bears crossing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I posted something online the other day that was like, who here thinks the police are important? And everybody in the crowd is like, oh yeah. And then people are like, who here is willing to put on the badge? And nobody puts up their hands. And it's such a tricky situation because I can tell you I will always get there as soon as I physically and possibly can. Is that as fast as I want to get there? Maybe not. Because I can tell you from my own experience, things can happen in a fraction of a second that can change your life forever. But we are only human, and we can only get where we can when we can. There's also, just like everywhere right now, there seems to be a significant decrease in the ability to get good employees, right? The boomers are leaving. The people who have committed their entire lives to policing probably have some crippling addiction issue and have given their entire souls to doing this for 30 some odd years. I have all the respect in the world for them because I'm at 15 years and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this forever, right? Because of the mental load that it takes being that person for so many people. In Fort Nelson, let's talk about access to resources. Riley, you touched on this a little bit with regards to municipal versus rural policing. So in a larger municipality, you have a lot more of what we refer to as sections. Okay, say you're in the Lower Mainland, you've got the IHIT, the investigational homicide team, you've got, you've got border investigations, you've got drug investigations, you've got all of these different things, and everything has a section. Okay, so there's like homicide team, there's an ERT team, the emergency response team, there's a dog team, there's all of these different things because they have the population that can feed the need for those things. That's not to say that we don't need them here. I would love to have a police dog in Smithers, but the reality is those are costs that are not reasonable for a small rural area to have all of the time. So if we need those resources, we have to communicate to the closest location, be that Terrace or Rupert or PG for a dog. PG has an ERT team, but there are different ways that we have mitigated the distance by things like forming a TAC team. So the TAC team is a group of individuals that are all, they're all trained to contain a situation until the extra major resources get there, right? Sometimes as a general duty member, I have to contain a situation until the big guns or the big guys or the big ladies show up, right? The people who know, I mean, I can figure out my way through any investigation. That is just what I do. It's kind of like, I'm going to pull up my dad, my Jim McCreesh voice. Well, you know, Jennifer, this is actually how he sounds. Well, you know, Jennifer, just like being a mechanic, you gotta have the right tool for the right job. I'm not gonna go and try and take a tire off with a screwdriver when I should be using an impact drive. Well, no, Dad, you're not. That's right. So I'm thinking like a literal toolbox. I have to have the right tool for the job, and sometimes that is getting somebody else to do it. And that's another thing. I credit myself of not having a big ego when it comes to policing. I know I don't know everything. The more I do in this career, the more I know. Whoa, I still have lots to learn. But I also know that sometimes the best choice is to get somebody who is specialized in this to look at it. It's no difference than going to a GP and being like, hey, what's this weird lump? They're like, we can poke it with a stick, or we can send you to a dermatologist who might have a better idea.
Yeah, totally.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that is one of the components of living in a geographically reserved situation where you are in, you know, a very small space. Sometimes it takes a long time to access those resources. It's no different than the medical system, right?
Yeah.
So in Fort Nelson, we policed a population of less than 5,000 people with rural camps that added another 12,000 people, but it might take us 3.5 hours to get to the rural camp. We policed 7 reserves. One of them, I literally had to ride in a truck that drove on the rail lines to get to a quad and then drive into Old Fort.
Wow.
Yeah, it took like 7 hours to get there. So, a lot of the time, I'm going by myself.
Yeah.
Right? Because we don't have the resources. Okay, you definitely need 2 people in town to cover town.
Yeah.
And if somebody has to go to Fireside, which is a 6-hour drive north, then you have 1 person covering town. If you send that person out, you've got no people covering town. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, one of the files that I went to was 2 people having an axe fight in Fireside. And so,
as one does.
As one.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have cable, they gotta make their own fun.
Yeah.
So I hopped in the truck, I have my lunch kit, have jerry cans in the back, and I'm going 6 hours driving code 3. I'm like, But geography, sometimes I'm going $1.30 trying to get there. Sometimes I'm slowing to 70 because there is a literal herd of caribou that is on the road in like Toad River, and I have to be like womp womp bonk 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 bonk.
That's ridiculous.
I mean, it was amazing. I would not change the experience that I had up there for anything. For anything. I mean, I love policing in Smithers because it is a much better place to live in general, but the experiences that I had in Fort Nelson, nothing will ever parallel that. And my husband and I don't have kids, so we also have the luxury of being able to go and do deployments in other locations. So I've worked in 13 different detachments all over the province of BC and into the Yukon, and Northwest Territories because I did Fort Simpson. So like it's been amazing to be able to go to so many different places and see the way it works in so many different locations.
What, with you being in so many of those small spots, and obviously not as many resources, all these geographical issues, all the things that you've had to get creative with, what are things that the people of those communities can do to kind of better assist you do the things that you need to do?
Oh, dude. Honestly, the people who are living in these rural communities, they are living there and they are making their lives there in a way that works for them. And a lot of it has to do with me working with them.
Yeah, for sure. No, I get that. I'm coming from like a, you know, if we're thinking about on our side of things, when we're working with someone, you know, we can't, how do I word this? We're trying to get, like when you're doing a investigation or your interview, you're trying to get information out of someone so you can better help them or get to the understanding them. What can just like people do to, because maybe of lack of resources, is there any ways that the community can, you know, as far as like having conversations with you guys or that interaction to better assist you?
I understand a little bit better now. So I thought you were like, how can they prepare a medical kit so that if you show up and have to patch something together? I'm like, whoa. Honestly, it comes back to communication.
Yeah.
The best thing that somebody can do to help me is talk to me. Tell me what's happening. Tell me what's going on. And I don't just need, today this happened. I need, today this happened, but but this person has been going through this, and have been their neighbors for 20 years, so we have noticed this deterioration or this decline or this development, and I know that they don't have connections with their family, so they don't have a support system. All of that is so important, right? And honestly, that it all comes back to communication. The better you can communicate with your service providers, whether it be, you know, personal trainers or doctors or police or ambulance or fire, anything, the better you can communicate and provide the information, the better my ability to help you in this situation or any situation. Yeah. That's another reason why I like to make so many connections in the community, right? Yeah. Because, for example, I recently met somebody who is not happy in their living situation in an apartment. And so I was able to go to 3 different locations in Smithers and be like, hey, I know that rentals are tough to find. I know that finding this amount of another rental opportunity that is this unicorn space is not really likely, but I now have myself, this person, as well as those 3 other community resources, any contacts they make that can help, you know, spread out the feelers, work the spider web, see if any other connections can help find that unicorn space. Then I'm not just doing it by myself all the time, because it doesn't matter how much and how often and how good I am at looking outside of the box, there's still going to be things that I miss.
Yeah, for sure.
So I love being able to use the connections that I've made in the community to access resources for my clients, or to help my clients.
That's really cool. It's like, I feel like, you know, I'm sure there are people who have had negative interactions, not to say explicitly with police, but like with authority figures in general, that kind of go, the way you're behaving is inexcusable, and they'll kind of be like, well, my life sucks, and they'll kind of be like, doesn't matter. And it's like, well, it kind of does matter. You know, like people tend to act like worse as their life becomes more stressful. People do tend to like their behavior is related to like their resources and their accessibility to like a quality life.
Absolutely.
So I think having someone who goes like, this is like an operative behavior for you and for people around you and for a community, but also recognizing that the behavior comes from a place of like trial. How can we address the trial that you're going through in and of itself is like, it's a pretty wicked approach, but it sounds exhausting.
It is. And honestly, one of the hardest parts of my job is going to a situation where somebody is like, I am in crisis, I need help. I'm like, amazing. I have all these ideas of how we can help. I'm going to help you put this in place and this in place and this in place. And I've just spoon-fed you how you can fix things on a global scale. I believe in treating the problem, not the symptom. Okay? So this is the symptom of this problem. Here is how we can treat the problem, and here are all the resources you need to do that. And people are like, thank you so much. Go yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'm like, okay, life's all about choices. I'm not responsible for yours. So it's very challenging, and it can be very exhausting. It absolutely can.
Yeah. What would you like say to someone who, I was thinking like outside of police, I was thinking like school situations where there's the authority figure who's going like, your behavior is unacceptable, but you know, we don't care about your the cause necessarily. If someone was like, if you were talking to someone in that authority figure who was like, well, that's not my job. My job is symptom management, not to go to the original source. Like, what would you say to someone like that? Because like on paper, maybe it isn't their job.
Well, I see where you're going with this.
I want to put you on the spot.
No, I just want to find an appropriate way to communicate this. The way that I deal with things is not necessarily the way that everybody deals with things. So you may go to a dentist who's like, okay, you have a cavity, but you're going to have to go somewhere else to get it fixed, and that person either does or doesn't fix it, right? Or you go to the dentist who's like, oh, just so you know, we did your cleaning today, you've got a cavity, we do have time today, we can fix that for you. Or you go to a mechanic, and when you go to a mechanic, Jennifer, you go to get your oil changed, that's all you've asked them to do. That's all they're required to do. But I wouldn't feel good about letting a vehicle leave my shop unless I've also checked all the fluids and checked the tires and make sure that vehicle's safe to be on the road. So I think it comes back to whether or not you are somebody who is comfortable with a role of continuously treating the symptoms, or somebody like me who gets irritated by constantly treating the same symptoms and would just rather address the problem. And in relation to the example that you gave about an authority figure saying to somebody, this is unacceptable behavior, I think it's I have to remind myself, like, they may consider that unacceptable behavior, and they may have all the patience in the world to deal with it a million times. Me, I'll probably deal with it 2 or 3 times, and then I'll be like, look, this is unacceptable. Let's find a way to fix it.
Yeah,
sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Totally.
So, especially when it comes to the youth and the kids, I think that one of the ways that our society and the systems in place in our society is failing people is by not encouraging more mandatory counseling sessions in relation to significant events.
Yeah.
Okay?
Fair.
So you guys have both been through a traumatic situation. Maybe you go pick heavy things up and put heavy things down, and you go for a run, and that's how you process it. Fair enough. But if you can't have that be the release that you need, what other options are there? Sometimes people get stuck and they're like, okay, well, I'm going to have a drink so it help me sleep at night, or I'm going to have a drink because it makes me feel happier again, and then it perpetuates a problem, right? So I think that if there was more things like major trauma management, or mandatory counseling check-ins for kids in school, where you don't have to go and tell them your entire life story every single time, but if there's like a weekly or a monthly check-in with a counselor at school to be like, hey, how are things going? Good. Because then you are strongly reinforcing that connection, that there is help available. That's another reason why I do things the way that I do in policing, and having these positive interactions all the time. It's so that if something bad happens, they're like, okay, well, I've dealt with Jen a bunch of times. I know that she can help, or I'm confident that she would be able to give me an answer. So I'm going to seek out Ginger Jen for help. As opposed to, oh my God, holy shit, this person just OD'd, don't call the cops. Do you know what I mean?
Totally. I know we've talked about when someone comes to ourselves and we're working with them, and just like, I guess, usually on like a physical fitness to start, because of the way how we have stuff set up, there's so many touch points with us, maybe compared to like their doctor that they would go to for stuff every few months, and it's a quick 10-minute visit, where generally it's like an hour at least with us multiple times a week. People have that comfort level. And they develop that relationship. And they end up you end up not actually being the role of counselor or friend or insert other title for people. So we kind of we've kind of talked about how we're like the triager of like a non like life or death situation. It's more like, I'm dealing with some of this stuff. And it's like, okay, well, where do we send you? And you're kind of talking the same sentiment.
Exactly.
It's like, you can be the, people are dealing with a crisis, not always life or death either situation, but if they're like, hey, I was in this situation and I had a positive interaction with Ginge, now I'm in this situation, if I reach out to her, she might not be the person I need right now, but I trust that she's going to send me to wherever I actually need to go to get the help that's provided, which is really cool. It's cool to see the synchronicity of, you'd think quite opposite things
Oh,
in a
man,
sense,
they
but it's
parallel
very
so much.
it's very close.
I made the reference earlier to the spider web, right? It is all part of the same web. It may be on a slightly different tangent or angle or path, but it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
I'm not going down an Illuminati road. I'm not going bonkers, but you see the reference, right?
Yeah.
So there's like, okay, this anchor point is policing. This anchor point is mental health. This anchor point is GP. This anchor point is physical fitness. This anchor point is nutrition. And all of those are going to connect somehow. It may not be a direct link, but they are all part of the same web.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That
Plus,
makes
it's almost
sense.
Halloween. Yay!
Yeah. It's thematic. It was good. It's thematic.
Yeah.
I think about like how when people go the extra mile for me, how much more cared for. I think about like when I broke my collarbone and had my concussion, like the most profound help that I was ever given was by the X-ray technician. And I interacted with so many different people because I had a traumatic brain injury and I had a broken collarbone. And of all the people that stuck out in my mind, it was the X-ray technician because he was the one who was like the most interested in me and my story, and I was having a terrible day.
Yeah.
The people that you're interacting with are literally probably going through the worst day of their life.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like that's so
a
like,
lot of the time.
so that space of being like I'm in a vulnerable position, and I just want someone to like care about me, not my body, not my situation. I want to be cared for myself. That was pretty intense for me, and that wasn't even the worst day of my life compared to someone who's like in the absolute worst day of their life. When that sort of interaction would be phenomenal. Yeah.
And just to continue with that, I love to remind people that your trauma is not the same as my trauma and not the same as your trauma. Everybody's worst day of their life is different.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right? So the worst day of a 7-year-old's life could be falling off a bike, right? The worst day of my life could have been when somebody tried to stab me and I had to take the knife away. The worst day of your life could have been that, concussion. But I think that people downplay their own experiences with trauma or the impact that trauma had on them when they start to compare that traumatic moment for them to other people's trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So we, it's okay to touch on this, but I was critically injured at work. I had a number of different surgeries on my leg and ended up going with an amputation because it was at the point where this little Scottish surgeon was like, I'm sorry, Ginger Jen, I don't think I'll ever be able to make it so you can run and jump again unless we chop it off and give you a spring. And I was like, yes, that. Let's do that. And he's like, oh, okay. Maybe a psych appointment first. I was like, sure, I'll do whatever you need. So I ended up getting the amputation, doing my rehab, coming back to work. Amazing. Kind of a big deal.
Very big deal.
2 members in the 150-year history of the RCMP, only 2 police officers have rehabbed, come back to work as an amputee in full gear, full general duty, answering calls. 2 people. Both females, both redheads.
Badass.
Yeah, for sure. You guys are like part of an elite club.
Yeah.
My mom says there's more strength than sense, and I'm like, yeah, that's about right. So clearly I should be wearing a kilt and tossing cavers and living in a different time. But when people are
With a
like,
peg leg.
right?
Yeah.
Then I could use the patch to cover my black eye. Pirate costume for Halloween for the win.
Yeah.
So if we are comparing your TBI to my amputation, you might be like, well, at least I have all my parts, right? And it can change how people reference their own trauma.
Yeah.
But by having people have an outlet for this traumatic event or this traumatic situation or this thing that hurt them, I think it allows them to get it out as opposed to stuff it down.
Mm-hmm. For
Yeah.
sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally. And I imagine that social media probably exacerbates the validity or the invalidity of your trauma,
Yeah,
whatever you
goodness.
kind of go.
Too many people, I think, turn to social media to share their story or communicate their trauma. And then, of course, it is an open venue for people that you do and don't need their opinion to communicate. right? And for some people, any attention is good attention, but it's just gonna take off from there. You have no control over what kind of feedback you're gonna receive.
Yeah.
So why not narrow the field, narrow the focus, go to somebody who is literally trained to help you through this situation, so that instead of potentially putting you on a negative mindset, throwing you down a rabbit hole, they can be like, okay, let's reset, let's refocus, let's work through this so that you don't have nightmares about it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, for sure. And that like opens a whole can of worms as well.
Mother goose.
Of like rural communities and accessibility to mental health care.
Yeah.
Which we will get into at some point.
We will get into,
for
sure.
We're gonna have people like that's the
plan.
goal. Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's hopefully. But
Well, I can literally talk for like days. We started with Ginger Jen talks a lot, and that's how she does her stuff. But
I think we got a lot of good stuff.
Is there anything else that you wanted to address before?
Probably a final question would be like what I think what's a distinguishing characteristic or distinguishing multiple characteristics that I think people with a proclivity towards RCMP could have. Like what would make you look at someone and be like, man, this kid, this youth or whatever would be like a really good rural community police officer?
I love that question. I love it. Sorry, he gets the gold star.
You got the gold one.
Yeah. We can put my gold star over the little hole.
So I am just, okay. As I've been saying this whole time, number one is communication. Not just the way that they are able to communicate, the way that they are able to receive communication, and the ability to understand. You may not accept other people's opinions. You may not like the choices they make in their life. You may not appreciate where they came from, but you need to be able to have just a modicum of understanding or recognition that this is what forms another person. This is what forms another person's behavior. And I think it can be difficult, especially in this technology age, for people to be able to communicate outside of texting, sending memes, sending emails, things like that. The one thing that I look for, if somebody is interested in policing, I'm not going to dissuade them. It's an amazing career. But if you want to end up in a more rural location, work on communication. The ability to talk to anybody is going to be the best tool that you have. And I'm talking like reading books to people in the lodge who can't, who are dementia patients and have no idea who you are or where their nose is, to, communicating with the people who are ESL and working in different locations in town and building the ability to understand different accents, different languages, communicating with your parents. Because I tell you, when I was growing up, that was a challenge for me. But now, as I demonstrated, I love communication from my dad. And now, instead of being a criticism or taking it as that, I look at it as a lesson and a memory. And now I get to share it with everybody. Whether they want it or not. Yeah. I often say, and that concludes today's edition of Unsolicited Advice from Ginger Jen.
That's good. I like
awesome.
That.
So yes, communication, and I'm also going to say responsible physical decisions. So understanding that your body is as much as a tool as your brain is. You don't have to be the most amazing person to do handstand push-ups and pull-ups and, cartwheels, though I can do them. You have to be able to move your body, not just for your physical health and well-being, but the physical health and well-being and the mental health and well-being of the people that you're going to be working with. There is nothing scarier than showing up at another detachment and working with somebody who is like let's say mid-30s, early 40s, clearly has been hitting the Tim Hortons lineup like way too often, and maybe smokes, right? Talk about a horrible cop stereotype. I don't want to run into a dark alley after somebody who's dangerous with that person on my heels, because it's going to be on my heels and then it's going to be on the ground, and then I'm going to worry about his safety as well as, do you know what I mean?
Totally.
So making reasonable and responsible physical decisions, having a drive and a desire to learn and communicate.
Yeah, very, very cool. I love it. Do you have any other questions?
No.
You sure? No, I got millions.
Well, we got a lot of questions for round two.
Round two. We have to have you on again because it'd be good to go into the other side of Ginger Jen too.
Yeah, you're very multifaceted.
Yeah.
You're like you got your Wonder Woman shaker there. You kind of have like your alter ego.
I kind of do. Yeah. I like to say that I'm team never quit. Clearly, at some point, I should have been. Team should have stopped, but I'm team never quit.
Never quit until you should have stopped.
And even then, I didn't quit.
Yeah.
I just took a different road.
Yeah. There you go.
So we're gonna cheers.
Yeah. There you go.
Where's your cup? It's right here. I was just gonna use my fist, but I got one. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah. Nice.
Right on.
Recording
That's
roll.
it.
Episode 4.